Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. What we are witnessing right now is nothing short of historic. We are at the intersection of global politics, economics, and great power rivalry, and the stakes could not be higher. The United States, under Donald Trump's leadership, tried to assert dominance in Latin America, particularly in Venezuela. But China has made a bold move, what I call its Venezuelan gamble. This gamble is now threatening U.S. influence not only in the Western Hemisphere, but across the entire international order. For decades, Washington has treated Latin America as its backyard, exerting political, military, and economic control. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves, has always been a central target of U.S. policy. When the Trump administration imposed sanctions, sought regime change, and attempted to isolate Caracas, it was meant to be a show of American power. The so-called maximum pressure campaign was intended to consolidate U.S. influence and prove American strength. Yet the outcome was the opposite. Rather than weakening Venezuela's government, the strategy backfired and exposed flaws in Washington's foreign policy playbook. It accelerated a shift in regional dynamics that few in the White House had anticipated. Trump's team believed Venezuela was ripe for regime change. The country was suffering from economic collapse, political division, and international isolation. U.S. officials assumed that sanctions, oil restrictions, and allied pressure would swiftly topple Nicolás Maduro's government and restore pro-Western leadership in Caracas. It was supposed to be quick, decisive, and symbolic. Instead, it became a case study in miscalculation. Washington used sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and threats of military force, yet Maduro survived and even hardened his position. Sanctions crippled Venezuela's economy, but also forced Caracas to seek help elsewhere, particularly from Beijing and Moscow. American pressure ended up strengthening the very ties that undermine U.S. influence in the region. The failure sent a powerful message to the world. If maximum pressure could not break a mid-sized country in America's own hemisphere, how credible are Washington's threats against stronger nations? Trump promised a quick victory, but years later Maduro remains in power. Venezuela has diversified its partnerships, while the U.S. looks weaker for having failed. Countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East are now studying Venezuela's survival as a model for resisting U.S. coercion. This marks a direct challenge to the Monroe Doctrine, which for over a century framed Latin America as a U.S. sphere of influence. By failing to dislodge Maduro, Washington exposed the limits of its dominance, while China and Russia seized the opportunity to assert themselves. This is not just a tactical setback, it is a structural shift. The foundation of U.S. authority in the Western Hemisphere is being tested. This sanctions campaign also had a devastating human cost. Instead of turning Venezuelans against their government, it deepened suffering, created shortages of food and medicine, and devastated livelihoods. The U.S. was seen not as a liberator, but as an aggressor, punishing ordinary citizens. This allowed Maduro to frame the crisis as a fight against foreign imperialism, fueling anti-American sentiment across the region. Trump's rhetoric was filled with bravado, threats of military intervention, and declarations that all options are on the table. But behind the words, Washington discovered its options were limited. Military action would have been disastrous, diplomacy lacked credibility, and sanctions simply pushed Venezuela further into China's orbit. The gap between America's perceived power and its actual ability to shape outcomes was laid bare. China's role in Venezuela was no accident. It was a calculated gamble. While the Trump administration sought to strangle Venezuela's economy, Beijing offered lifelines, loans, energy deals, and technological cooperation. This was not charity. It was a long-term investment in influence and resources. Venezuela, with its vast oil reserves, was too valuable to ignore. China's oil for loan strategy guaranteed steady energy supplies while insulating Caracas from U.S. financial pressure. This created a parallel trade and finance system outside the dollar. Beyond oil, China invested in housing, telecommunications, and surveillance systems. These projects tied Venezuela's sovereignty more closely to Beijing. What America tried to break through isolation, China rebuilt through integration. Symbolically, China's presence in Caracas sent a message: the age of uncontested U.S. dominance in Latin America is over. By financing infrastructure and securing energy, Beijing directly challenged the Monroe Doctrine. Where Western investors saw instability, China saw opportunity and gained influence at a discount. Every loan, every project, every shipment of oil deepened a relationship that Washington struggled to undo. For Trump, this was a nightmare. His strategy turned into an opening for China. The United States, once indispensable, suddenly looked dispensable. The reversal of roles was stark. America, the enforcer, was out, maneuvered by a rival that acted with patience and pragmatism. The implications go beyond Venezuela. Other nations in Latin America now see that U.S. pressure is not unbeatable. They see that alternatives exist, whether through China, Russia, or a broader multipolar order. What once was Washington's uncontested backyard is now a contested space. This is the erosion of a system of control that defined U.S. power for generations. Venezuela has become the stage on which this global transition is playing out. America's maximum pressure campaign revealed what leaders across the global South long suspected: that U.S. power, while formidable, is not absolute. When Washington tried to close doors, Beijing opened them. When the U.S. sought to isolate, China integrated. The symbolism matters. For Venezuelans, U.S. sanctions meant suffering, while China's medical aid and infrastructure investment meant relief. Globally, the contrast is clear. America punishes, China builds. One evokes fear, the other offers hope. And in geopolitics, hope often wins in the long run. Trump wanted Venezuela to showcase American strength. Instead, it showcased American weakness. His administration's confidence in sanctions rested on outdated assumptions that no longer held true. Venezuela adapted, survived, and even turned eastward. The attempt to prove dominance revealed vulnerability instead. In the end, the story of Venezuela is not just about one country or one failed U.S. policy. It is a window into the emergence of a multipolar world. The unipolar order centered on Washington is giving way to a world of competition, choice, and change. Venezuela is one of the proving grounds where this transformation is unfolding in real time. The consequences of this transformation stretch far beyond Latin America. For decades, the United States relied on a simple formula: economic might, military presence, and political pressure would guarantee compliance. But Venezuela proved that the formula is no longer universal. The emergence of alternative partners, China foremost among them, has broken the monopoly of American power. This change is not confined to the Western Hemisphere. Leaders from Africa to Southeast Asia are watching carefully, drawing lessons from Venezuela's resilience. They see that U.S. sanctions, once a near-guaranteed death sentence for a government, can be mitigated when Beijing and Moscow step in. They see that alternative financing, technology, and energy partnerships create lifelines that bypass Washington's grip. And most importantly, they see that U.S. threats are not absolute. This is why Venezuela's struggle carries such symbolic weight. It is not merely a contest over oil or regional influence. It is a case study in the collapse of unipolarity. America's effort to reaffirm dominance ended up exposing its limits. China's gamble revealed the power of patience, strategy, and long-term investment over short-term coercion. The narrative also reshapes global perceptions of legitimacy. Washington claimed its sanctions were designed to restore democracy, but to much of the world, they looked like punishment. Meanwhile, China's approach, though driven by self-interest, appeared constructive. It built roads, housing, and communication networks. It offered trade rather than isolation. It projected stability where the United States projected instability. This contrast reshaped the battle for hearts and minds. For many nations, America began to symbolize division and hardship, while China symbolized opportunity. That perception may matter as much as tanks or sanctions in the 21st century. In an age of global media, optics are power. And Venezuela has become a powerful optic of American decline and Chinese ascendance. But there is another dimension to this story: time. The United States sought rapid change in Venezuela. It wanted Maduro gone within months. China, by contrast, thought in decades. It was willing to weave itself into the very fabric of Venezuela's future. This patience is a hallmark of Beijing's global strategy. Where America looks for quick victories, China builds for the long game. And in geopolitics, the long game often prevails. The irony is that by isolating Venezuela, the U.S. accelerated the very future it most feared, a multipolar world where America cannot dictate terms alone. Each sanction pushed Caracas closer to Beijing. Each diplomatic threat drove other nations to question Washington's reliability. Each failed attempt at pressure chipped away at the aura of invincibility the U.S. once carried, and so Venezuela is more than just Venezuela. It is a mirror reflecting the transformation of the global order. It is a reminder that dominance, once lost, cannot easily be reclaimed. It is proof that coercion has limits, while cooperation, even transactional cooperation, creates bonds that endure. This is the true power of China's Venezuelan gamble. It was not a gamble made with force or fury. It was a gamble made with patience, strategy, and a vision of a different world order. And as long as Venezuela survives under Beijing's shadow, that vision grows stronger. What we must recognize is that Venezuela is not an isolated episode. It is part of a much broader pattern unfolding across the globe. For decades, America operated under the assumption that it could use sanctions, pressure, and conditional aid as tools to bend nations to its will. That assumption is now collapsing in real time. From Tehran to Ankara, from Moscow to Caracas, governments once cornered by U.S. policy are finding new exits, new alliances, and new sources of strength. The global South, long dependent on Western institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, now sees in China an alternative, a partner that offers credit and infrastructure without lectures on governance or the heavy hand of political interference. This is why Venezuela's survival matters so profoundly. It is a signal to the world that there are choices, that the old system of unilateral dominance is no longer absolute, that the monopoly on power once enjoyed by Washington has cracked, and once that crack appears, it cannot be sealed again. Let us be clear, America is still powerful. Its military reach remains vast, its economy enormous, its cultural influence significant. But what has changed is the perception of inevitability. The aura of uncontested supremacy has faded. Nations now calculate that resistance is possible, that survival is achievable, and that alternatives exist. This shift in perception may prove more decisive than any battlefield victory or economic sanction. Consider the symbolism of this transformation. In the 20th century, U.S. hegemony was built not only on weapons and wealth, but on the belief that no one could rival it. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a warning to the world. America would tolerate no challenge in its hemisphere. Yet today, Chinese oil tankers dock in Venezuelan ports, Russian aircraft land in Caracas, and infrastructure projects carry the stamp of Beijing, not Washington. And the response from the United States, words, sanctions, and frustration. The silence of decisive action is itself an admission that the old rules no longer apply. This is the quiet revolution of our era, the decline of unipolarity, and the rise of a multipolar world. And Venezuela is the stage on which this drama is playing out. It is not just about energy, it is not just about ideology. It is about the rebalancing of global power. The Venezuelan gamble also exposes the weakness of America's over-reliance on sanctions as a weapon of statecraft. Sanctions may punish economies, but they also encourage innovation and new alliances. They may weaken a government in the short term, but in the long term, they can strengthen its determination to resist and diversify. Venezuela turned eastward. Iran developed its own networks. Russia built alternatives to Western finance. In each case, the intended victim adapted and the credibility of U.S. power eroded. This is why the Venezuelan case resonates far beyond Latin America. It speaks to leaders in Africa who resent being dictated to by Western powers. It speaks to governments in Asia who seek independence from Washington's orbit. It speaks even to Europe, where doubts are growing about the wisdom of unquestioned alignment with U.S. policy. The lesson is simple. Power is no longer about coercion alone. Power in the 21st century is about networks, resilience, and the ability to offer choices. China has understood this. The United States has not. And until Washington adapts, it will continue to see its influence erode in places it once considered secure. Venezuela is a warning sign, but also a prophecy. It warns America that the old tools of dominance are blunt instruments in a world of rising alternatives. And it prophesies the coming age of multipolarity, where no single power dictates the rules, and where alliances are fluid, pragmatic, and often transactional. This is the global stage we are entering, a world where survival is not guaranteed by submission to one superpower, but by the ability to balance among many. A world where America, once the uncontested center of gravity, must now compete, negotiate, and persuade. The Venezuelan gamble may seem like a regional story, but in truth, it is a chapter in the rewriting of the world order. And history will remember it not as a footnote, but as a turning point.